experience, Colby, that is extremely captivated by aviation. As far as when you first enter the industry, it's crazy how many different backgrounds that kind of converge as they enter the realm of aviation. And I'm certainly of the minority. I think the vast majority typically knows that they're going to enter aviation early on. And first and foremost, a lot will go to a accredited university that's aviation oriented, Embry-Riddle or whatnot, do 4 years there. You got several students that might go the Part 121 route, 1 to 2 years there. In fact, that's been condensed. What I'm finding to be true now is a lot of them are doing it in 6 months and kind of expediting the program. And then there's those that are earn a penny and then work a penny and then spend a penny. And that was kind of my background, Colby, coming back from the corporate world. It took me about 3 years to get all my certs.
Wow.
Yeah, and I saved enough and decided to come into the aviation world, but certainly took a little bit more of, I think a lot of people can relate in the sense that coming from the Part 161 where it's not as regimented, so to speak, and it's kind of expounded into about 2 to 3 years. Some may even take 4 to 5. So my background is in the corporate field, and I made that leap of faith about 3 years ago, and no regrets. Certainly embraced everything about aviation since.
No.
So yeah.
That's super cool, man. So,
Yeah.
Okay, so you work corporate and you dropped it. Do you mind me asking what made you get into aviation in the first place?
Yeah,
what's your whole story? You were working in the business industry and then you left it.
Right.
What happened?
Yeah, I think I think that's the first question you get as a pilot, is have you always wanted to be a pilot from year 5 when you got on your first, airliner, or is it one of those instances where an epiphany happens? And for me, it was always where I always enjoyed getting on the airliner. And I always wanted that window seat, right? And I knew it was something that I wanted to do, but having entered, the corporate world and done really well, having a great career and a position, I think when I left the corporate world, it was one of those where you kind of hit a glass ceiling and you start realizing what more can I learn as far as even in the global supply chain world that I was in. And I said, look, I need to expand my learning curve. I want to expand the boundaries of what I can learn. And once you hit that glass ceiling, I think I had an epiphany where I was like, I can kind of make that leap of faith in the aviation or the medical industry. I realized that learning curve is infinite, as you well know, as far as an aviation is concerned. You cannot stop learning. A good pilot never stops learning, right? So I made that jump to aviation, and it's been great. It's been great. But that was the initial catapult that was, threw me into the aviation world about 3.5 years ago.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That's super cool, man. How was it for you? It seemed like it came pretty naturally, you flying. I know you had a lot of success with your check rides and whatnot. How was it? Was it difficult for you to learn to fly, or was it?
I think everybody's a little different. For me, it's one of those instances where I've heard more times than not from my instructors, you start off slow, and then it's just like a switch, and it literally is like you're ready for a check ride. So I have CFIs and instructors that always literally have gray hair in the first 3 weeks with me, just going, come on. And it's certainly embellishing a little bit. I don't think it was. Yeah, it does. But then again, there are those that, as you well know, that just click, right? But and then maybe they kind of stagnate over the course of the curriculum. For me, it was one of those where you give me 2 weeks. I'm a slow learner. It looks like it's going to be 2 months, and then within 5 weeks. Dude, I don't know what happened. You're ready for a check ride. Yeah. And it's always been that way with pretty much every one of my certs. So I think everybody learns a little differently, So that's one of those where the flying aspect and the ground portion as far as learning the information has always still come naturally for me.
Okay,
so,
I respect that.
Yeah.
Big question for you. So you're a pipeline pilot and you've been doing that for quite a while. And you have a lot of experience in that. What is that like? It seems like I mean, do you want to give me like a rundown exactly what pipeline flying is?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing with aviation is as many enter the industry. I don't know about you, but for me, it was one of those instances where when you initially enter aviation, you get tidbits and bits and pieces as to where you're going to be headed and what you need to, what's mandated that to get where you need to go. And for me, it was one of those where it started to click after my PPL. And then at that point, you start to realize you have two avenues, right? You can either go instruct or you can go in the Part 91 world, which is where you can actually earn money and build your hours as well. So instructing I was never averse to no aversion to instructing. It was one of those where I was fortunate when I sent out my resume, I literally got a call within about 2 or 3 days. And it does, and in this day and age, as we both know, that's very uncommon. Now, keep in mind, this was in late 2018, 2019, pre-corona. I accepted the offer, and everything else is kind of history. As far as pipeline is concerned, boy, I tell you what, I say this a lot. What we do as far as pilots are concerned is, I think, completely out of the realm of pretty much every other type of flying, short of maybe bush flying in Alaska, right? So, and I think the biggest element is how volatile the elements are depending on where you're located, right? And certainly where I fly, the weather can change so quickly. And two things I realized as a pilot, as far as a pipeline pilot, is your stick and rudder skills becomes just not just short of incredible, and you don't have a choice. You really don't. It's not one of those instances where you're like, oh, I sure hope my stick and rudder skills get better over the time. They just do, right? And then ultimately, it's about reading the weather. You don't have a choice but to become an expert in weather reading, right? And then I think pipeline, as far as pipeline is concerned, short in contrast to the Part 135 world, or the cargo or passenger world, you're flying, typically filing a flight plan. You're filing or you're flying sometimes at flight levels, but typically you're in 12,000 or above, maybe 8,000. And so more times than not, autopilot, right? A lot of times you'll have a second in command, right? Pipeline it's you and only you. You are PIC. The true essence of what PIC is, you are PIC, right? In instance of emergencies, you are PIC. There's no, so I think I embraced it. I think as a pipeline pilot, you have to embrace it, right? I don't think it's one of those where you can come in and just kind of tiptoe in and go, I think I want to do pipeline. You either do it or you don't. And when you come into it, there's just the dynamics of actually surviving. When I say surviving, I don't say use it lightly, but it truly is, in the sense that we fly at 500 AGL, right? I don't know that there's any other type of flying.
Yeah. Let me ask you this: what exactly is it? What's the job responsibility of a pipeline pilot?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times pipeline, the preconception of pipeline when I entered the pipeline world is you're going to follow a pipeline from point A to point Z, and it's more times than not a straight line, and it could be 2 or 3 hours over maybe several cities, maybe a couple states. What pipeline, quote unquote, pipeline patrol does is more or less gridding, and albeit that a lot of times you're flying, say, a 182 or high performance plane, or a 172 or Diamond. I've seen several Diamonds out there, or Citabria, things of that nature. A lot of times those are primitive planes, but at the same time you have typically a proprietary module or tablet that's issued to you, and you fly that according to all your assets, right? So you're juggling both. It's always inside the cockpit, outside the cockpit. And first and foremost, you need to stay safe and within regulations. And you kind of compile that all together, and it certainly becomes quite a bit of a workload, especially in very volatile days when the weather is just not favorable. Certainly your job becomes that much more exponentially compounded and that much more tough. But yeah, the primary responsibility is first and foremost your safety. And then second of all is the job itself. The job itself typically is flying over assets, observing, seeing if you come across anything out of the realm of ordinary, right? You're looking for leaks, methane leaks, things of nature that is considered to be what you would need to notify the petroleum company.
Okay. So just quick, I'm a pipeline pilot as well. So what we do is we fly over, we fly low above the ground, and we're flying over oil industry. We're looking for any potential damage to the infrastructure, like you said. So could be leaks, anything like that. We are low level, so it is much more high risk and whatnot. So there are
a lot more obstacles, as we know. Lots of towers.
Yeah.
A lot of times it's over cities too. It's not out there in no man's land. And I think the biggest thing, of course, is the fact that we fly so low to the surface that a lot of times we are in no man's land, right? So it's not one of those instances where you're up at altitude where you have time in the course of an emergency to maybe make it through all your checklist, right? It's one of those where you need to instantly know what you're going to do and execute it, right? So I think that's the biggest thing, is what makes it so different. From all other
it is very different. It's very unique in a lot of ways. I mean, it's challenging, it's fun, but it's very challenging as well. So let me ask you this, what are the pros and cons of flying pipeline? So like you said, there's other jobs you can do. You can become a CFI, which is the more traditional route.
Sure.
You can try and get a job flying pipeline. Sometimes there's survey jobs. There's unique jobs out there, but what are, like, for pipeline specifically, what are the pros and cons?
Yeah, I think pipeline, first and foremost, I think unequivocally, I think the first thing that comes to mind is how quickly you build hours. Now, keep in mind, you have long haul pipeline pilots, which is you might get 4, 5, 6 hours a day, and you might fly 3 times a week, maybe, right? More times than not, as pipeline pilots, as far as patrol is concerned, you're flying sometimes 6, but more times than not 5 days a week. And on average, between 4.5, more like 5 to about 7, right, hours a day. So as far as how quickly you can build time, I think it's hands down, I think, the number one time building job in the industry as far as the Part 91 realm, right? So I think that first and foremost, that's it. I think the pros is it makes you a better pilot because of how much PIC time you have. You're looking at maybe a 200 and 250 mile radius, give or take, as far as where you're flying, but in every direction, right? You're not going strictly to this destination all the time. Right. So it changes every day. It's not like, hey, my course is from point A to point B every single day. It's this time it's going to be point A to point D. This time it's going to be point A to point F. And so it changes every day. And then when it does that, you've got to incorporate the weather as well. So I think your PIC skills have to be top notch. You have to flight plan. It's not one of those where you have a dispatch, right? You have to actually sit down and pre-flight, flight plan yourself, and make sure it's correct before you launch, right? So everything is on you. The onus is all on you, and I think that's what makes it so rewarding at the end of the day, especially when you finish a successful mission. So I think the autonomy and the PIC is pretty incredible. I think the cons, I think we've kind of touched on that, Colby. The cons, I mean, it's dangerous flying, right? I have no other way to put it. It's dangerous flying short of south of Alaska. And this, I think it's the most volatile flying you're going to be able to find as far as flying is concerned. Not only because, one, you're so close to the ground, but two, the weather. We know how quickly. I can speak to experience of how quickly the weather can close in on you, and next thing you know, you're filing special VFR, and you go, what happened? So I think the danger aspect is certainly there, and knock on wood, it never comes to be where you don't get 3 wheels on the ground, but it's certainly the reality of it.
Okay, so just to sum up, pros and cons. Pros, you are building a lot of hours, you're shooting fast, probably probably the best way, or one of the best ways at least, to build hours.
Hands
If you're
down.
trying to get a different job.
Sure.
Other pros, you're getting a lot of PIC time, sometimes solo.
Yeah.
I mean,
More
and
times
you're
than not solo.
solo, and that definitely builds character as a pilot in a lot of different ways.
Yep.
And then you're flying through adverse conditions, so you're learning really quickly.
Yep.
I mean, flying in strong winds, bad weather, you're flying low to the ground. You have to handle the emergencies yourself. You're also getting a lot of PIC time.
A lot of PIC and planning.
Okay.
Yeah.
The biggest cons, though, from what you're saying, is dangerous. You're flying low to the ground.
No doubt. No doubt. Dangers and the volatile various elements that you're flying in. Yeah.
All right, Lee. So yeah, another question for you. Someone who is flying pipeline, exactly how many hours can they expect to build in maybe like a year or so?
Yeah, I think on average, as far as from experience wise, anyways, in a course of, typically if your company has a contract, some do, some don't. But let's go with the 12-month contract. On average, you're probably looking to build around about 1,400 hours, maybe 1,350, give or take, 100 either way. I think the other side of it, when we touched on this, is the CFI side, is the portion of ground time you have to do, right? So a lot of times you're at the airport from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., and you might be with a student or several students, but at the end of the day, you might get, say, 3 or 4 hours, but you're there the whole day because of how much pre-flight and ground time you have. As we both know, it's constant flying with us. Once we go wheels up, only time we're putting down is either when we're done with our mission or we're putting down for fuel. And at most, we might put down for 30 minutes for fuel or lunch or snack. But other than that, you're flying. So all of it's going to be flight time. And on average, like I said, you probably build 4.5 to 7 hours a day.
Yeah, that is a lot different than a CFI who's going to be doing a lot of teaching time on the ground, like you're saying. So, yeah, as a pipeline person, you are going to build a lot of time flying really fast.
Yeah, and that's certainly no knock to CFIs, because I certainly, as we both know, we're looking to maybe go that route as well, right? But it's one of those where once you go wheels up, it's nonstop.
Yeah. Which it's good and bad. It's good in the fact that you are building time.
Yeah.
Maybe it's bad in the fact that if you don't want to be in that plane for that long, you're just going to
we both know when you come from flight school, even when you were building time in cross country, it is very rare that you are in the plane for 5.5 hours, and this is the norm sometimes, as we both know. You can go 5.5, 6 hours and not put down. You certainly acclimate to it a little bit, but it's certainly not what we're used to when coming out of flight school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question is, how does someone get a job in a pipeline industry? I mean, obviously times are tough.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what can someone do to get a job?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is you have to differentiate between pre-corona and post-corona, and hopefully we move as time moves on, we move back slowly, phase back into a pre-corona stage of aviation, right? But as far as the huge difference I find to be true is pre-corona. There's an app called I believe it's Airline apps, and then there's various other apps that you can use as well. But it's one where you can create your resume, and then you can choose the employers to which you want to shoot those resumes out to, right? So it makes it very simple. You say, hey, look, I just found another one today, a new employer that might be hiring. I'm just going to send that out. So that's probably the most traditional way that we know how to go and apply for a job. I think the biggest thing now, as far as post-corona, is you've got to modify your resume to cater to the job that you're applying to. And when I say that, we don't want to rest on our laurels and say, hey, look, this resume is going to go ahead and pass for this job or that job. If you're looking for a survey gig, if you're looking to fly to put out fires, if you're looking for a jumper job, if you're looking for a pipeline job, which you might be flying into some mountainous terrain, you want to cater it to that specific job. So your resume should be slightly modified to pertain to that job. Because I think more times than not, what I've seen, and I've had friends that send me their resume and I go, what job are you applying for? And they'll be like, I'm applying for this job. I go, wow, that is a very generic resume for this particular job, right? So I think that's the biggest thing is be ready first and foremost if you do get the interview, because you're only going to get one shot if that employer calls. And that's assuming you're lucky enough to get that call for an interview. But to get your foot in the door, first and foremost, I would say modify your resume to cater it to the job that you're applying for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations for pipeline? Is there anything specifically they look for?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, and as I mentioned, is one, first and foremost, if you have a troubleshoot scenario, right? Two, I think the other aspect of it is, have you flown into airports that have, say, narrow runways? Because a lot of times, a lot of us, right, with our flight schools, more times than not, we know that when this starts blowing over 12 knots, the flight school is going to ground the planes. And more times than not, you don't have an opportunity to fly in high wind situations, right? So three aspects, or two, I should say, at least what I can think of right off the bat is the winds, right? Our winds is 35 to 40 knots, right? And that's our max. But when and ever, whether we're time building or in flight school, have we ever flown in anything more than, say, even 20 to 25 knots, right? So as pipeline pilots, you don't have a choice but to fly in those conditions. And if you have flown in those conditions, certainly you want to add that to your resume. Okay. The other aspect of it, or the other add-on, I would say, is have you practiced on runways that are certainly narrow? Right? Because not all of us have. A lot of flight schools or a lot of airports, even non-towered airports, minimum I've seen is usually 50 feet, right? A lot of them are maybe 75, but more times than not, 100, 150, right? So if you have landed on their more narrow runways, you want to probably put that in. And what I'm getting at is have you flown outside of the realm of what we are accustomed to as far as student pilots? Right?
I'm going to agree with that. I think because we do fly in very adverse conditions, very strong winds, and we do land on narrow runways, and we do fly in, just bad weather in general. So I think if you do show that, you put that on your resume that you are capable and you have done that before, you have experience flying in bad weather. I think that will go a huge way with flying with pipeline.
Yeah, I think, and I think the key word understating is the fact that you legitimately have. You don't want to just certainly put that because at the end of the day.
That's something they don't really teach you. I mean, that's something you should put that probably doesn't get put on your resume.
Exactly. I mean, let's say you're building cross-country time and you flew from, I don't know, the Midwest to the West Coast or Midwest, and you flew over the Rockies or Sierra Nevadas or whatnot, and then you had to put down in an airport where maybe there was some light icing, or let's say the runway was 45, 50 feet. We both know our runway is actually about 28 feet wide, right? So at the end of the day, if you have legitimately flew in those conditions and can manage in those conditions, then yeah, you certainly want to put it. You don't want to put it down if you haven't. That would probably get you either in trouble or, knock on wood, something might adversely happen to you, right? So I think if you've done that, you want to certainly put that in your resume as well. But I think those are the two biggest ones.
One more question, unless you have more to say. Well, it's just about so just in summary, it's put on the fact that you are capable of flying in adverse weather conditions, or more so that you have flown in adverse weather conditions.
Right.
And also, like you said, any previous emergencies and the way you handle that can be a plus.
Exactly.
If you show it in the right way.
Yep.
Another question: what are the minimum requirements a pilot would need?
So I think pre-corona, when the aviation industry was certainly all open, right? In the 121, 125 corporate world, part 91, and that conduit was still flowing all the way through, you probably could get hired. As we all know, typically you can walk with your commercial cert at 250 hours. Still a unicorn sometimes in that you walk from right then into, a commercial gig, but it was certainly plausible pre-corona, now post-corona with employers having, the pick of the litter, right? And you might have one position and 25 to 125 resumes for that one position. Obviously, the competitive nature or the competition and the bar has been raised. So I think, honestly, to be realistic, the higher the better. Naturally, if you were, for some reason, have 750 hours, great, right? But I think, honestly, you're looking at probably between 400 to 500 would be more realistic in the pro-corona world. Hopefully at some point revert back to pre-corona, but I think right now you're looking at realistically between 350, 375 to 500 would probably put you in the range of at least be able to secure an interview.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is doable for a lot of.
Yeah,
I mean, that's not 2,000 hours though.
No, it's not. It's one of those where when you finish now your cert, it's where you might have to just go build a few extra.
It is very competitive right now. Unfortunately, there's hundreds of thousands of people applying for each job. It's very competitive, but it is doable. Okay, so I really wanted to talk. So you have a lot of experience doing interviews as well as you actually got accepted to the airlines.
Yep.
And then your class basically almost made it through. If I remember right, your class was told that they were going to make it through, and all the classes were cut before. But then your class at the last second didn't make it.
Yeah, so when we talk about classes, I think the big thing is, were you in the midst of full board training, or were you going through your ATP, CTP, and then about to sit for your ATP?
Okay, I don't know about this.
Yeah,
so
sure.
This is stuff I'm not familiar with. What is this exactly?
Yeah, so ATP, CTP is the initial entrance into the ATP training curriculum, right? ATP, CTP is basically, your certification training procedure or program that will, when completed, will let you sit for the ground portion. And that is your ground exam. Once you pass that, as we all know, for every cert, or I say not all certs, but almost every cert.
Oh, so you're talking ATP. Okay, you need your ATP, and you move on and you start the training.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. So what I was in the preliminary stages. I had not full bore went into the full training. But that program, as far as the ATP, CTP, is on average, usually on average about 7 days, and then when completed, you have to take it. Keep in mind, this is not one where it's, I might take it, I might not. You have to sit for it, and then when you complete it, you can actually take your ATP ground portion. Okay. Yeah.
So my biggest question for you, I really wanted to talk to you about so that when you're getting interviewed for the airlines specifically, that's a big deal, and you have to be prepared for that.
Yep.
What as pilots can we do to prepare for the interview with the airlines?
Yeah, so the interview phase, is obviously your most crucial phase, right? It's your make or break. You're either gonna get the job or you're not, and the fact they're even calling you should be a big plus, right? So a couple things. One is they've got what they call airline interviews, right? And it's one of those where it's a paid membership, right? But at the same time, I believe it's good for a year. Right. And at that point in time, it's basically, I wouldn't say cliff notes, but it's basically, and this certainly changes and morphs over the years, but let's say in 2019, John actually went and sat at, quote unquote, this airline or this region or whatever. Yeah. He basically can go ahead and add his input on what he was asked. So it's a compilation of all these questions in a database to when you go to that respective airline that you're interviewing for, maybe you'll look at the last 2 years. And all these guys, guys and girls, I should say, has compiled all these questions, right, that you can look at and prepare yourself for that. So
what is this? So what is this called? This
is airline interviews.
Airline interviews.
Yeah, pretty simple.
It's a program you pay for.
Yep.
And then
it's online.
And it's a list. It's a database of all the questions could possibly be asked during the interview.
Yeah, exactly.
But is it a class too? They teach you how to prepare? Like
no, it's one of those where they'll give you the question, and then more times than not, they'll give you the answer. My suggestion is when you look for the answer, you might want to reinforce and make sure that answer is correct. Okay. Right? So I'm not saying there's some questions are wrong, but at the same time, you want to make sure you answer it in your own fashion, and furthermore, make sure it's correct.
So this is like a
quote unquote cliff notes. Right?
Online, okay, but it's not like a quiz. Are you meeting with actual people, or are you answering questions online? It's just learn on your own.
You're basically, it's just accessibility to this internet site that actually is a compilation of questions, and it's really huge because it's coming straight from those that actually have sat with a recruiter. It could be a captain that interviewed you. It could be an HR individual. It could be a technical guy that might have interviewed you. A technical. HR individual that might interview you. So it's pretty cut and dry, right? The other aspect, as we all know, several of us have heard of Shepherd's Air. That's going to be huge for your ground portion, right? As far as taking the ATP ground. But if you do have access to it, why not revert to it? Because that certainly is a database of several platforms which you can use. The other one is there's several books we all know that it could be Gleim. It could be several different ones where you might have used ASA that I've used, and I'm sure you've used, that maybe you have a preference towards Gleim or ASA or whatever it might be. There is an ATP compilation of study and learn, right? And so I would certainly check on that. But I think the big thing is if you build on that database of questions and build from that, you should be prepared. They're not going to ask you all those questions, but if you have a general idea of what you're going in and you have covered topics and everything, you should be good. The final thing is an approach plate. They will actually ask you to brief an approach plate. And when they do, you definitely want to do it in the airline format.
I guess I have a question then. When you show up to the airline for the airline interview, what is the format of that interview? Do they sit you down and they just want to see your personality skills, and then they take you through like an approach plate and ask you some general?
Yeah. So pre-COVID, some of the regionals would interview you virtually. And it was not, everybody was under the presumption that you would walk in and it would be in-house, right? Yeah, so a lot of it was virtual, right? So it was one of those instances, and then it was a two-sided coin. One would be more of a HR portion, and that would be more of hypotheticals, right? What would you do if so-and-so did this? What if so-and-so, you showed up at the gate and the captain had alcohol in their breath? Who would you call? What would you do? Where is your moral compass, right? And they actually be able to see who you are as an individual and what you do and if you make the right choices, right? So very hypothetical questions. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 5 years, right? So HR, and then on the flip side, it just turns into a technical. So right after the HR, it starts to turn into a technical portion of the interview. And that's where they start asking more of the, hey, once you hit your intermediate fix, or once you hit your initial approach fix, or once you hit your final approach fix, can you continue to descend? What makes you not be able to continue your approach? Go ahead and brief this approach plate. Things of that nature. So very more technical aspects of it, right? The interview is not extremely long. Prepare for maybe between 1 to 2 hours, and then on the flip side of it, there are many regionals that actually invite you to come in-house. And those are the ones where it's same aspect, same format, I should say, but you're in-house. And it could turn into more of an all-day affair. No more than 1 day affair, but more times than not, it's more of a show and tell initially, show you around, things of that nature. And then your interview portion might take about 1.5 to 3 hours, right? And then they'll wrap it up, and then and then you'll go home and you'll find out if you got the job.
Okay, so all right, so just to put that in, just to summarize that, so you're going to show up, they're going to be asking you questions like, just general questions about situations, like certain situational awareness questions, right?
Right.
And then they might ask you some actual knowledge questions, and that's pretty much it. They're going to be looking through your logbook pretty thoroughly, right?
Yeah, so they're not. It's all predicated upon the respective regional. Okay. So a lot of times it's going to be your last 4 pages. They just want to make sure your numbers are accurate, and then some of them will do a light audit where they'll cover the whole thing.
So yeah, I was gonna ask, do they actually call? People are always stressing out, make sure logbooks are perfect, which is a good thing to do, obviously. But are they going to actually call and make sure? Are they going to call your previous?
Yeah, I think that's certainly a plausible situation that might happen, right? I think where we're going with this is, have you fudged your logbook? Yeah. And I think it was as pilots, when we enter aviation, first and foremost, it's an honor code, right? So what you do in your logbook at the end of the day is a character or encapsulates who you are as a pilot. So I think we all know when we go into it, what we put in the logbook should be validated to what we actually have done. And so to answer your question, will they call this flight school? Will they call this flight school that you might have rented a plane to fly across country? Sure. It's one of those where they are not restricted from doing that. Yeah. So why wouldn't they do that, right? So if they have the resources, certainly they will. I think the biggest thing is, keep in mind, is your PREA report. And that is basically a record of every employee that you've worked for, every drug test you might not have passed or passed. And then, of course, first and foremost, your hours that you've actually logged.
What is this called?
Your PREA. So it's basically a compilation of all the employees that you've went through. And when I say PREA, what they'll do, the regional will send a request to your former employer, all your employers, keep in mind, but let's say it's just one, and they'll go ahead and have them fill out this form. They'll fill this form out. They'll say, hey, it could be the drug test. It could be this individual only flew during the day, right? So if you used to actually log night at your last employer and you are a VFR pilot, day pilot, there's an issue, right? So to answer your question, long story short, they are certainly allowed to call if they so choose.
Okay.
Yeah.
I understand. I have a question. So back when I was doing my flight training, I originally applied to a flight school that required me to do an interview to see if I could be accepted to the flight school.
Right.
And they were actually, they worked with an airline. Okay. The airline had specific requirements they were looking for. And it seemed like the people were more interested, not so much in my resume, but more my body language as an individual.
Sure.
And my speaking skills and probably my charisma.
Sure.
And just my ability to answer questions as well, but they weren't so concerned with that. Is that how it is with from your experience with the airline interviews? Are they going to be more concerned with your body language and maybe your confidence level and whatnot?
Yeah, that's a good question. I want to say it's a little bit of everything, right? So I know the ones, I know the interview that you're referencing, because pre-corona, there was a lot of airlines that would come to in-house to various flight schools. And some flight schools had 6 regionals that would come in maybe once a month to recruit. Others might only have 2. But at the end of the day, what they were looking was, they weren't putting you through the ringer because it wasn't a full-blown airline interview, right? What they wanted to say, who are you, and do we kind of like you? And they have to base it off their assumption that their 20-minute conversation with you is who you are as a person, right? So they are basing it a lot of your mannerisms, your how verbose, how are you really quiet? Things of that nature, right? In the airlines, as far as the airline interview is concerned, that is certainly one big aspect. I think it's first impression, right? So you walk in, if you're just, shoulders hunched over and you're quiet, and you might be the best pilot ever, right? But if you don't show it, it's going to show. First impressions are huge. So they're certainly managing, or that's certainly influenced into their decision process. But it's not maybe 15, 20%. Still a big portion, but there's still 80% out there that
have the confidence and just the ability to have basic social skills.
Yeah. So I would say the biggest thing, if your friends are telling you, hey, so-and-so, you are a little on the quiet side, or this is one of those instances where maybe it's one time only, but it better be the time that you need to come out of your shell and show who you are.
Is an airline interview, is that pretty similar to a check ride in the fact that you're going to get grilled on a lot of questions, or is it more just like very basic knowledge? You don't have to be too worried.
Yeah, I would think I think basic would be an understatement, right? I think everything you just mentioned is accurate, but I think basic would be an understatement. Is it a check ride? No. Is the question, as far as the technical aspect, as far as your knowledge of an approach plate or an approach or things of that nature, is it enough that they have a good feeling that you will get through their training? It's not so much, hey, is so-and-so going to be a good airline pilot? Is it enough to know that you're going to get through all of your ATP training because of how much they actually invest or divest in you as an individual? So
how important is it that you answer the questions correctly? I mean, they're going to be briefing you on, say, like they might want you to brief an approach plate.
Sure.
If you fail to brief that approach plate correctly, could that be the difference between you? Like, is that going to really mess up your career in the long run, or is that is it not a huge deal?
Yeah, I think the thing is, it's not going to certainly it's not going to mess up your career in the long run, as you alluded to, right? But could it cost you the interview? Sure, right? It depends on how bad you jumble or mumble or stumble through an approach briefing, right? They're not looking you to do it perfectly because they know you're not coming from an airline background. So maybe some of you guys are, right? But at the end of the day, they're looking to see is, look, did you answer all the questions? I say all. You might miss a few, right? If they ask you something like, hey, you know what was the localizer DME alpha versus a Bravo, right? Some people might not know, but what's the difference? And that's not going to fail you. But what if you miss 6 of those questions? Your knowledge base maybe is going to allude to the fact that you didn't either prepare enough, or you don't know, or you didn't prepare, right? So if you miss a few questions, it's not the end of the day. But if you answer all your questions correctly and then you stumble a little through the approach plate, they know they can correct that. They know you can get better at that, right? But so it's not going to, but if you actually are just like, yeah, I missed 6 questions and then I bumble through the approach plate, and you're looking to get through a legitimate regional, you might not get the job.
All right. So just in summary, obviously the airline interview is a big deal.
Yeah.
You can use airline interviews, is what it's called, to help you prepare for the questions. Make sure your body language is good. Make sure your confidence is good. Be prepared for them to ask you questions about aviation.
Yep.
You want to make a good presentation. Make sure your logbook is nice and clean. Do you have any other recommendations, such as like the way you dress and groom yourself, or just obviously show up on time, show up early, call ahead? Is there anything like that?
No, I think at that point it's pretty self-explanatory, because they'll give you the time. You want to be prepared if it is a Zoom call, right? Because in the pre-corona world, a lot of it was virtual, right? So you want to make sure you might be the first one logged in and waiting for them, as opposed to them waiting for you, right? But at the end of the day, how you dress is your character. You should obviously dress professionally, but beyond that, it's like, if you actually add some flair to whatever you do and that's your personality, so be it, So I'm not certainly going to tell you do this or don't do that, but certainly come in professional. We all know what you should expect in an interview as far as what they're looking for presentation-wise. But at the end of the day, beyond that, no, I think the biggest thing is come prepared, know your knowledge base, right? Have a good mindset, persona that you're going to convey to them. And then throw caution to the wind. The rest is history. You should be able to get the job if you do everything correctly. All right.
I appreciate that. Thanks for coming on, Lee.
Yeah.
I have no more questions. Do you have anything else to say?
No. Continue to watch the channel and continue to learn as a pilot. If you're not learning, you're not growing as a pilot. So that's all I got to say.
That.
Yes, sir.
All right, take care.
All right.